Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be talking about CPW's Oil and Gas Compensatory Mitigation Grant Program that is new this year. We've got Taylor Elm from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We also, as I understand it, have Andrew who will share some commentary later, and a lot of other staff from CPW and DNR. Great to see you all. Yeah, I think with that, we're all really excited to hear more about this opportunity and what it means for conservation of private lands and other lands. So I will turn it over to Taylor to share more. Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Appreciate the invite to be able to talk about this new funding program that CPW has started. And we'll kind of present the basics of the program, and then I think have ample time for some Q&A and discussion kind of around maybe use of the program and just larger conservation thoughts in general. First off, I'll just do a quick introduction and then pass it over to Andrew Newman, who's going to help me present today to say a few words about himself. I'm Taylor Elm. I'm the Senior Energy and Land Use Supervisor for CPW's Northwest region, so essentially the northwest quadrant of the state. I've been doing energy and land use work with CPW full-time for a little over 12 years now, and just more recently kind of involved more in this role of oil and gas compensatory mitigation project planning and working on that. So Andrew, pass it over to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Newman. I'm the Northeast Region Senior Land Use and Energy Coordinator, Supervisor, whatever you want to call it. Taylor and I are still working on those titles there. But yeah, my background is in wildlife biology. This is my second stretch working for CPW. I started back early in my career back in the 2000s working with the Northeast region. Found my way into private industry working on land use and energy development projects. And I'm now back with CPW working in the Northeast region and excited to be here to talk to you today. Thank you.
Awesome. So I will attempt to share my screen here. Let's see. Shoot. Sorry, Hannah, let me
Okay, this is always the hardest part of the day.
I wasn't seeing my presentation in there, so let me shift gears here. Okay. Hannah, do you see that in or in presentation mode?
I do. It looks great.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So as Hannah mentioned, we were planning to talk to you all today about a new funding opportunity that CPW has available. We're calling it it's a mouthful, our Compensatory Mitigation, Conservation Easement Transaction Cost Assistance Grant Program. We should have came up with a good catchy acronym, I think there. Maybe we'll need to look at that. But essentially, and I'll kind of go through some basics here first. But CPW has been collecting compensatory mitigation funding from oil and gas operators, permitting new oil and gas developments in Colorado. And we have been tasked with or provided the opportunity, I should say, to implement mitigation projects to offset oil and gas impacts utilizing these funds. And before I get into kind of the background and details behind that, I figured I would just hit everybody here with probably what they're most interested in, these nitty-gritty details at first here in case you tune out on us. Basically, this grant program is open and available right now. If you go to CPW's grants webpage and scroll down several boxes, you will see the Oil and Gas Compensatory Mitigation Grant Program is on there. The hyperlink is on this slide as well. And Hannah, I figured I could share these slides with you in PowerPoint format if you wanted to send them out to your membership as well.
That'd be great. Thanks.
And basically, as I mentioned, CPW has initiated this grant with the intent to offset the adverse impacts of oil and gas development through perpetual conservation of functioning wildlife habitat. Funding available for the rest of this calendar year is approximately $600,000. That's split evenly. And this is a little bit of give and take. This is approximate, but generally split evenly with $200,000 available in CPW's Northeast, Northwest, and Southwest regions. Nothing in the Southeast region currently due to that area of the state not having mitigation funding available quite yet. And we'll touch on this a little bit more, but eligibility for the most part is certified land trusts operating in Colorado and meeting some general eligibility requirements that we'll talk about. So a little bit of history of kind of what brought this program about. In 2019, the Colorado legislature passed Senate Bill 181, and this piece of legislation resulted in the ECMC, formerly COGCC, promulgating new oil and gas regulations for and permitting process for oil and gas development in Colorado. One of the key parts of this was what we refer to as the mission change rulemaking. It literally changed that agency's mission from that of fostering oil and gas development to regulating oil and gas development. CPW was involved in this rulemaking process, which changed what we call the 1200 series rules for ECMC. And basically, those are the wildlife regulations. It really created a lot tighter restrictions and requirements on oil and gas operators for wildlife protections. And one of those is it created a mandatory requirement for compensatory mitigation to offset the adverse impacts. And specifically, and we'll show you this here in a little bit, that is triggered for new oil and gas disturbance within a certain subset of CPW mapped high priority habitats. Hopefully, a lot of you are familiar with CPW's high priority habitat mapping. We essentially have a list of species that we comment on for land use developments and maintain species habitat maps for. And so for the purpose of this mitigation program, or the triggers for requiring mitigation, this boils down to what we call our big game seasonal ranges. So these are, winter concentration areas, severe winter ranges, elk calving areas, migration corridors, and then our grouse. There's different categories when you talk different species of grouse, but generally grouse production or breeding areas. And then important to also note that this compensatory mitigation can be achieved by oil and gas operators through either habitat enhancement projects that they complete on their own or a monetary payment to CPW's program, which we've really seen kind of become the more popular option. And then in addition to this, I kind of wanted to speak a little bit as far as background specifically to this grant program that we're talking about today. After CPW kind of propped up this new mitigation program, each of CPW's 4 regions went through what we call a planning and prioritization process. And basically, we got with our field staff and said, okay, what is, the top things that we're looking at that would be most beneficial for offsetting oil and gas impacts and helping these wildlife species that we're targeting here. And during that process, all 4 regions were doing that independently. Not surprising to me, all 4 of our regions and all of our staff identified habitat conservation as the top priority. And so with that in mind, we kind of started looking at, okay, how do we achieve that? Is that fee title real estate purchases? The problem with that is that carries a hefty price tag, and we did not really have that level of funding available. And so the tool, as you guys are all aware of conservation easements and how to further conservation through contributing towards conservation easements, kind of rose to the top. And we started looking at how to do that. We started running into some hurdles. And so with a lot of help from our staff, we identified a competitive grant program as probably the most effective way to get some of these dollars out the door and completing some meaningful conservation projects. And that's really for several reasons. One is to provide a competitive environment for distributing these funds. Two, and really importantly, we're looking to have this program to solicit, good projects that we're not even aware of and create an environment where we can field projects for conservation out there, and create a little competitive nature perhaps as well. And then, three, it helps us with a little bit of a schedule we'll talk about too, as far as collecting projects ideas and distributing funding at certain times kind of throughout the year. So here's just a quick map. This is well spud data. So wherever wells have been drilled in Colorado, this is an ECMC data set. And I just want to show this for background as we start kind of looking at some of the geographic criteria for the grant program. So I mentioned our southwest region. This is the San Juan Basin down around La Plata County. You can see a heavy concentration of oil and gas. Historically, this has been a very active oil and gas basin and is an area where CPW has received compensatory mitigation funds and kind of anticipates, future activity as well, which we can kind of talk about what this kind of looks like beyond this year, going forward, potentially if we crystal ball it. Then also certainly our busiest oil and gas area in the state is the DJ Basin, Weld County. My counterparts Andrew and Brandon Barrett here today cover the DJ Basin. And then over into my territory in the Northwest, the Piceance Basin, encompassing mostly Garfield and Rio Blanco counties, is where the Northwest region receives a lot of our oil and gas mitigation funding. That being said, we also have some opportunity and have received limited funding in Jackson County and North Park as well, and a little bit in Eastern Moffett County and Far West Routt County, and also a little bit in Mesa County too, I should say. So we probably have the greatest geographic flexibility in the Northwest because of some different areas that we have activity going on. And then this map, I just wanted to show, I mentioned those high priority habitats that CPW maintains. These are all of them lumped together. So these are all those big game seasonal ranges and all of those grouse habitats basically lumped together at a statewide scale. And so I should have overlaid wells and this, but when you think about the requirements for oil and gas operators to mitigate, as I mentioned, it's new disturbance within these habitats. So you can start seeing that Piceance Basin, those areas in the DJ Basin and in the Southwest where oil and gas activities are going on within these CPW mapped habitats is kind of where we're receiving this funding. And also, I should say, where we have an expectation to be mitigating those impacts for these species and these habitats. And actually, with that, I will turn it over to Andrew for the next couple slides there.
Thanks, Taylor. Appreciate it. Before I jump into the slides, I noticed that we have a fair number of Department of Natural Resource staff and CPW staff on the phone. I wanted to acknowledge all the other sections that helped us put together this program. Folks from outside the land use and energy team, people on the real estate teams and the procurement teams at CPW really put a lot of good thought and effort into helping Taylor and myself and the other regional leads put this program together. So I just wanted to acknowledge them quickly and say thank you to them. Jumping back into the slides, as Taylor mentioned, we have just some basic eligibility requirements for grant recipients or applications in this process. As he mentioned, certified land trusts are what we're looking for, and those need to be land trusts that are certified by the Colorado Department of Conservation at the time the easement is granted. We have a link on the website page to a list of those held by the Department of Conservation. So if people interested in this program can look there to make sure that who they're working with are certified. Really, the intent of the program is for CPW to provide funding to address the due diligence and transaction costs associated with developing and finalizing a conservation easement. And CPW doesn't want to hold the conservation easement. We're looking for third parties to hold the easement itself. And so those are the high level areas of eligibility requirements that we're looking for on these projects. Any questions there from the group before I move on?
Andrew, there's one in the chat.
Oh, is there? I forgot there was a chat. See if
Sorry, I
find
can
it
just
here.
say my question too, but it was from a previous section. But I was just curious about Southeast Colorado, if you had any idea on like timeline around if and when there would be funds available in that region.
It's a good question. Our Southeast colleagues are not online today. You know, it really depends on approved oil and gas permits to drill, and then we receive that funding once those projects actually go to the construction phase. So they may have some funding that has been approved, but we haven't received it because the drilling has not actually started to occur. But I'd have to refer to our folks in the Southeast to confirm any numbers or, you know, timelines on funding. Taylor, is there you have anything to add on that?
No, I think I had the same response there, Andrew.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like
Okay.
our colleague down there is Karen Voltura. It does seem like I've heard her talking about some planning in the works recently, but like Andrew said, it's hard to say when that might become available. So I just jotted it down here as a follow-up, and we could kind of get her take on that and follow up with the group.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so moving on to the regional requirements and preferences. And some of our planning documents centered around compensatory mitigation and how we apply these funds to achieve the conservation outcomes we're looking for. We look to do a substantially equal philosophy, which I've heard this described a couple different ways. So Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, but substantially equal really means that we're looking to, one, offset equally functional acres of habitat that have been impacted by oil and gas. We may not always reach an exact 1-to-1 ratio, you know, of conservation benefit in relation to the funding provided from each impactful project, but we try and hit that mark as close to possible as every time. But it's often not 1-to-1. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And then the other way to look at it is substantially equal is that we want to spend the money or the fundings, we want to apply that in the regions where the impacts have occurred. And so I think that kind of underlies the idea that Southwest or Southeast doesn't have any funding available right now, just because they haven't had a lot of impacts recently in any of their approved oil and gas plans. And so we're trying to keep the money in the regions where the impacts have occurred, if not in those HPH polygons where the impacts did occur or are occurring. And so we're trying to keep those things on balance, both on acres of impacts and conserved acres, and then in the regions where they were generated. And you can look back at those HPH maps that Taylor presented in the previous slides, and it's really based around the presence of high priority habitats. We don't often receive mitigation funding from oil and gas industry for plans that are outside of high priority habitats.
And Andrew, the only other thing I would kind of add to that
Sure.
with this terminology of substantially equal philosophy is, like Andrew explained, kind of trying to do our best without putting extreme requirements on these and making it very rigid as far as those funds having to go back to the exact area where they were received for the exact habitats, you know, the same county. We've found once we start putting too many restrictions like that, you have all these individual pots of money that have so many restrictions, it becomes very hard to implement a project, and you kind of lose flexibility to lump funding to get, you know, bigger projects done. And so yeah, trying to balance all of that and still kind of hit this substantially equal philosophy.
Yeah, that's a great point, Taylor. And I think we've allocated it as regions $200,000 independently. I think at this point we recognize that that funding is going to go into projects that will conserve HPH in the region, and we're not trying to identify the exact, track it all the way back to the exact OGDPs that created the funding sources themselves and the impact. So at this point, we've pooled the funding. We're just trying to keep it focused on the regions where it was generated, if that makes sense. All right, moving on. So the application and review process, we try to keep it as an easy application as possible. We have forms that are available, looking for basic project information, timelines, anything else that's relevant for us to make decisions and prioritize the applications as they come in. We are looking for all relevant documents. And as Taylor and I were preparing for this webinar, we realized that we don't have a comprehensive list of what all relevant documents might include. And so we are looking for assistance from the land trusts and applicants and other parties to help us identify things that are relevant to these applications. I'm sure there's a basic subset of things that we're looking for, but it's probably going to be on a case-by-case basis, and it could be different from one application to the next. I don't think we have a hard, fast list, though, do we, Taylor, on the website?
No, I do not think we did provide that in the materials.
Yeah, and that's another thing to keep in mind is that this is a brand new program. We're learning as we go, and we will, provide informational and other process updates as we see are necessary as we go. So looking for good feedback from partners and those that are applying for funding. And Taylor and I and the other regional leads and the other folks on the land use and energy team are looking forward to getting this going, rolling it out, and starting to adaptively manage things as we go into the future to make it the best program possible. The application period is basically open year round. We've decided to keep it open just to make it easy for those folks applying. And then we plan to do biannual reviews in August and then again in February to allocate funds out of the buckets that we've allocated. And so hopefully that'll be a regularly enough application period for people to get their applications in for consideration. Once the applications are in, they would be reviewed by the individual regions themselves first for prioritization. And then I think those that would be approved out of the regional review would be considered by our statewide advisory committee that tracks all of our 181 spending and provides advice and consent on different types of conservation projects. This last bullet is an important one. We've discussed ways around this, but this is where we're at today, is that the disbursement of funds would become as a payment as a reimbursement upon closing. And so I know that there are other programs out there that have loan assistance programs or other types of bridge gap funding sources to help landowners get to closing. Unfortunately, at this time, we don't have the ability to do that, but it is something that we acknowledge is a bit of a sticky wicket for the landowners to navigate to get to closing, because there are often funds required ahead of time. Taylor, anything to add there?
No, I don't think so. And yeah, I feel free. I should have mentioned earlier, Kim, jump in at any time as well if you feel that you need to correct anything or provide some more background. Kim Rogers obviously runs our larger CPW conservation funding program, and so we've relied heavily on her and her team for this process as well.
I see Kim's not jumping in, so we must be pretty close to the mark there, Taylor.
Good.
Yeah. I think we covered everything on this slide. Any questions? We do have our contact information here. These are the regional contacts. We obviously have a lot more folks on the broader team, but these are the good places to start if you have questions. See a question in the chat. Is there a limit to the amount awarded per easement? I don't think so. I think it's limited to the amount of available funds in the region, right, Taylor?
Yeah, I think that is correct. And one thing we didn't kind of speak about, but you know, we're generally, I think, gearing this towards due diligence and transaction costs. I think potentially if there's opportunities for, bargain sale easements and folks have an opportunity where they want to pitch a proposal to us where some of this funding maybe actually goes towards the purchase price of an easement, we're open to taking a look at that. And so depending on those various scenarios with different projects that might be available, yeah, I think that's correct. Not necessarily any cap on available per project. You will see in that application, the website and the application materials, there are, I don't have it in front of me, but are some caps, I guess, on certain costs like landowner legal fees, and I may be blanking on a couple others, and Kim can help me here, but I think those would be the only things.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the one I was thinking of, Taylor, was the legal fees.
Yeah, anything extra on that, Kim?
Thanks. I just wanted to add one distinction between funding transaction costs and then funding a real estate interest. The purchase price of a CE, a third party CE would be if CPW partially funds a third party CE, we have to have a real estate interest. And in the CE, an interest in it. And so that's typically expressed by a right of entry onto the property and a right of enforcement, not the obligation to do either, but just the right to do that. The transaction program that the guys are talking about that just covers transaction fees doesn't require that. And that's in it for those of you that work with the landowners to do third-party land trusts. You know that not all landowners want to have that kind of relationship with a government, the state. And so that's a difference that's important to note there between what's being offered. Yep.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate that. I'm seeing a couple questions here in the chat. I'll just touch on them quickly. Jeff was asking about the link or the reference for the habitat areas. And again, those are the high priority habitats that we showed in an earlier slide. All of those are unioned together in that slide, but you can look on the ECMC online GIS website mapper and go through and look at high priority habitats, or I think we also have them available through our land use page on the CPW website. But it's really tied to those high priority habitats for the big game and grouse species across the state. Other question was, is it 200,000 per region per cycle? I don't think we're just looking at the first cycle right now. And I think since we're rolling this out, we've allocated 200,000 from each of the 3 regions. We do have additional funding that has come from mitigation payments from industry. But right now, for this first cycle, we've allocated the 200,000 per region times 3 regions. So there's 600,000 total for this first cycle. And I think we're kind of going to play it by ear, Taylor, to see how things go in this first cycle. And then we'll kind of make decisions on allocating more funds as the program develops.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. As we kind of spoke to earlier, we're highly dependent on the oil and gas activity going on and the amount of funding we have coming in as to what I think we're going to be able to allocate each year. So it's hard to say. The other thing I guess we should have mentioned with the 200,000 kind of per region that's available is we are intending to look at this as essentially a first come, first serve type of opportunity. So if there are applications received by CPW that meet the eligibility criteria, that really check the boxes for us as being a good project, we are likely going to, approve funding for those within that 6-month cycle that we showed earlier. That chunk of funding obviously would then be removed from what's available. We are hoping to keep the website up to date, and maybe even the Keep It Colorado membership would be a good opportunity to kind of do this with announcements. But if a region expends all of the available funds, we want folks to be aware of that, and so they're not wasting time putting together an application, and we've actually distributed all the funds for the year in that region. So just another point I wanted to kind of clarify there so folks are aware.
Taylor, the thought occurs to me that if we do receive a high number of applications this first cycle and have to make decisions based on limited funding per region, I would assume that we would want to keep those. We'd have to make decisions somehow, and that those applications that did meet the criteria but somehow we didn't have enough funding to meet all of them in one cycle, I would assume we would keep those and roll them over into the next cycle.
Potentially,
Yeah,
if I guess if that timeline would work for applicants, maybe there is potential there. But yeah, I think you're correct with that regional and then that statewide committee process that you mentioned earlier. There would be groups that would essentially rank if demand exceeds availability in that instance within a cycle. So yeah, when notifications are provided, I think we could let applicants know that the next what might be available rolling into the next kind of annual funding cycle, and if the timeline could work for them. I don't know if that would necessarily take a reapplication, or we would have those materials on hand to kind of look at for the next go around.
yeah. Just a little bit of a growing the program and kind of figuring it out as we go. And so we're hoping that applicants are expecting a little bit of flexibility on our part, trying to figure out as we maneuver through these things and trying to make it the best program as possible. That was our last slide with our contact information. I think now we just open it up for other questions or discussion. Did we get everything in the chat?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Taylor and Andrew. I am so excited to hear about this program. It is so new, and I am impressed by your application. I thought I run a pretty streamlined grant program within Keep It Colorado, and you have me beat. This is a single page. So nice work. I'm sure that'll be nice to fill out for folks who, yeah, meet that initial criteria of being in the impacted area. But yeah, let's hear from others who might actually have projects to roll out. Maybe Kim first.
Oh, thanks. I had my hand up. I wanted to kind of add a caveat about the comment of maybe this program could fund conservation easements. I think that, with a $200,000 budget in each region, they wouldn't be funding much value towards the conservation easement, and my folks have to get involved then once we do that. And so I think long term, if this program ever offers significantly more money through this, then maybe it could do that, because there's a lot more responsibility that CPW has to have when we fund the purchase price of a conservation easement. And given how expensive it is for the land trust community to do their due diligence for these CEs, I think with a $200,000 budget, you could, 2 deals on transaction costs alone could eat that up. So just wanted to sort of add that caveat there. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. I should have, yeah, definitely added that any of those considerations outside of just transaction costs would probably be well into the future if budgets were significantly expanded over what is currently proposed.
But I think the great point that you made in that comment is this is an opportunity for people to engage with Andrew and Taylor and their counterparts across the regions. If you have really exciting projects, you know, talk to them about it, and we'll see what can happen.
I just wanted to make a comment, and I think this part can be pretty informal, but I think it's the timing of the review decision lines up really nicely with Keep It Colorado's transaction cost assistance program, where our deadline is the end of August, and then also usually the end of February. So it seems like with these review periods for the oil and gas program just occurring slightly earlier, if a project were to receive oil and gas funding, they could pull their application from our grant cycle, or if they didn't receive the funding, they can be sure to get in before the deadline for our grant cycle. So I think that's a really nice nice occurrence, and I don't know if that was intentional. I don't think it was intentional. I think we lucked out on that.
You know, that is good to hear, Hannah, because there was some thought put into that, obviously.
Okay. Yeah.
But it was a few things. It was balancing kind of our CPW staff that will be involved in the review process, and you know, busy times of the year for the agency, and then some considerations from some of our folks that are involved with conservation easement projects and their input regarding maybe when the better times of year for these would be for typical projects and typical closing dates. And so I know very little about that, but I'm very glad to hear that lines up, because that was kind of our best stab at trying to create kind of that 2 times a year review period.
Mhm. Great. Other questions? And I guess I was just going through the chat. I don't know if we managed to, maybe I missed it. Jeffrey's question on a map about habitat areas that are priority areas for CPW. Is that something we could share out?
Yes. There's actually a few good resources, I think, for folks to be able to look at CPW high priority habitat maps. Andrew mentioned one is through the ECMC, the Energy and Carbon Management Commission's website. I believe they have some tabs across the top of their website, and one should say maps. That has a lot of oil and gas data on that online web mapper, obviously. If you, in their table of contents of layers, you can find Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and there is our high priority habitats that you can click on and off. Those are sorted. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. Those are sorted by the oil and gas rule categories. So kind of getting a little into the weeds, but those that we talked about earlier are under the Rule 1202D, called the mitigation or density category, I think. So you'll see that. Another resource would be the Colorado Natural Heritage Program has a online web mapper that they have put out, and I don't have the link to that handy, but it's called Codex. I believe the Colorado Conservation Data Explorer. That has, Sarah is awesome, she's on it. That has all of CPW's high priority habitats as well, I believe. And then lastly, if you're GIS savvy and you actually want the shape files for our high priority habitats, if you, maybe Sarah could find this one too and go 3 for 3. If you access our high priority habitat table, I think on our website, it's titled Recommendations for Avoiding and Minimizing Impacts. Andrew mentioned this, there are hyperlinks in that high priority habitat table to the data sets that CPW makes publicly available, at least, which should include all the big game and the specific grouse ones that we're talking about. Things like raptor nests and grouse selects are not publicly available, at least from us. And so those do not have hyperlinks, but all of our others should have hyperlinks to our most active or most current updated high priority habitats. So there's a few ways to kind of get at that. Outside of that, if you're having trouble, or it would be helpful if we sent a package. I think any of the energy liaisons would be happy to do that. If you follow up with that contact information that we provided there, we could definitely get you steered in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Other questions from folks who, yeah, are curious to learn more, have specific detail maybe pertaining to their region, especially if it's Northeast or Northwest. Well, great. If there are no other questions, Taylor, Andrew, how can people reach out to you? What's your availability, or, for taking a phone call if someone has a question about the grant program?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I speak for both of us. Our email address and phone numbers are on the website under the contacts there. They'll be on these slides if we can get those sent out. Whatever works easiest, email, phone call, we're happy to field that. Answer any questions if we can't answer that, at least collect those questions and go to the right CPW folks that do have the answers to that, and follow up with you. Along those lines, yeah, if there's questions about potential projects and eligibility and what they might look like, we're definitely happy to start looking at some of those and talking about those. I guess one other thing I'll add, Hannah, and you and I had kind of briefly talked about this, is obviously we're not looking to compete with Keep It Colorado Wilds program. We're really hoping to complement it and kind of make everyone's dollars go farther. And so, yeah, I appreciate the timeline comment earlier, Hannah, but if there's projects that potentially meet the criteria for CPW and that helps Keep It Colorado funding, stretch a little bit farther to just get more conservation out there on the landscape, that's, I think, really the goal and what we'd be happy to see. And so, any additional thoughts or questions that folks might have for us along those lines, we'd be definitely happy to talk about that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, folks, if you're thinking of applying for the Keep It Colorado Transaction Cost Assistance Program, and you might be eligible for CPW's new program, I definitely encourage you to try that route and see if that might work. Just it seems like it's maybe a more narrow area that is eligible, but once you're in, it's pretty straightforward application and all that. So and no limit. We have a limit of $75,000 for our transaction costs, and while there's a regional limit of available funds, there's technically no limit on the individual project. So that's really helpful for not having to fundraise from multiple places to get a project done. Great. Okay, well, we will share these out. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining today. If we missed your question, please reach out, and yeah, hope to get some great projects on the ground with this grant. Thank you so much, Taylor and Andrew and all the other CPW and DNR folks who made this happen.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah.